Hello everyone and welcome back to Wordfence Live. We know you work hard on the content for your site, whether you're running a membership site, an e-commerce site, or maybe just a small blog that you're actively posting articles and content on. Now, maybe you're seeing bots scraping that hard work and you're finding your content elsewhere on the web, on spammy sites. Not only is the scraping taking a toll on your bandwidth, it's also potentially affecting your search rank. So today we're going to talk about the strategies to protect your hard work that's being stolen by the bots. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment to get started. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today on Wordfence Live. Today is January 12th, 2021. Let us know where you're viewing from today. I am in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, like usual. Not too bad outside today. It could be worse, no snow. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. In a few moments, I'm going to be joined by our QA engineer and threat analyst, Ram Gall. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about defeating scraping bots. So you have a website with valuable content that you put a lot of time into, and it's likely that spammers have taken notice of that. And the people behind these bots are looking for that great content to take and repurpose for their own sites to generate income from that. So today we're talking about how and why they do it, and how your content might be targeted, and we're going to discuss some strategies to help defeat these bots. So if you're excited about the stream, please hit the like button below the video here and let us know you're interested in this content. You can hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when we go live in the future. Typically, we are live each Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're broadcasting to YouTube, so your comments can be seen openly. We ask that you don't put anything in the chat that may be sensitive. If you have anything specific to your site, if your site's hacked, if you're having issues, anything like that, you can write into feedback@wordfence.com and use the subject line Wordfence Live, and we will get a reply over to you as quickly as possible. So let's get started here by bringing in the threat analyst and QA engineer, Ram Gall.
Hi.
How's it going over there, Ram?
It is going, as it always is. How about you?
It's going well. So we have Chloe off this week, though I believe she is working on a blog post that's going to be coming out here shortly. So if you're not already subscribed to the mailing list, might want to get subscribed there, and you'll be notified here shortly when Chloe's post goes out. Ram, what are we going over today as far as these scrapers and bots, and what are we not going to go over with regards to those? I think we're going to focus more on more than just the robots.txt file and blocking via the htaccess. Is that right?
Correct. So basically what we're going to go over is how to, at the very least, limit malicious actors from stealing content from your site, and on what to do if and when they actually republish that stolen content without your permission.
Sounds good. And before we get into this content, let's move forward with the swag opportunity here. So you'll be seeing some links posted into the chat here. We ask that you do not answer the swag question in the chat initially. Go ahead and use the form for that, and later on you can write out the answer when we go to announce the answer to that and the winners. So the question for today, whenever you see the link there in the chat, go ahead and click on it and submit your answer here. What is the most helpful tool in Wordfence for thwarting content scrapers? So whenever you see that link there, go ahead and click on it and submit the answer to that. What is the most helpful tool in Wordfence for preventing these content scrapers? So we will be sending out swag to the first 5 correct answers for that. We will get your email address on the form there, and we will be in contact with you if you answered correctly there. So Ram, we're going to go over some things to do with content scraping here, why people are doing it, how it works. Do you want to start with the basics here? What is content scraping?
Okay, so content scraping, also known as web scraping or screen scraping, or it's basically a form of data mining or harvesting or data extraction. Basically, what happens is that someone sends out bots to go out to websites and collect content, and download blog posts you've written, images you've uploaded, text you've written, available scripts, that kind of thing. Now, bear in mind that actually scraping publicly available content is not illegal. There are entirely legitimate reasons to do this, but it can become a copyright violation and damage your business when someone republishes your content without your permission. Now, there's a whole bunch of legal framework with that fair use can apply for certain reasons. But for the most part, if someone takes a copy of your web page and publishes it on a site that they own and uses it, that's something where they clearly shouldn't be doing that.
Now, I'm sure we're going to go over this, but whenever this is done the right way, is it done a little bit more methodically and slower to not really hit the resources on the site?
To tell you the truth, I can't answer that for sure. But there is a few legitimate reasons for content scraping. One of them is historical preservation, like the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, that does basically scrape your website's content and scrape the content of as many sites as they can in order to preserve the state of the web at a given point in time. And if you email them, they will remove your site from the archive if you ask them too nicely. So that is one thing that, one feature of legitimate content scraping. Now, there's also individual researchers or companies that scrape content to train machine learning algorithms or to create paid market research data sets, which is for profit. And I mean, again, if they're not actually publishing your content, I don't think there's all that much you can do about it. But then you run into the people that, scrape content for malicious purposes. Spammers, scammers. For one thing, if you write good content, and SEO is largely about good content, someone might make a clone of your site to try and basically duplicate your content and boost their own SEO and build their site. Or they might use your written content to, embed on a site or sites that they own in order to get, affiliate commissions, generate leads, or get advertising revenue from their site that has your content on it. And I mean, people might download images you've uploaded to your site. If you're the one who took the picture for that image and they're reusing it, then they might not be allowed to do that unless you've specifically licensed it for Creative Commons, and even then there's still some restrictions that can apply.
Now, whenever we move in here to how these content scrapers work and how they do what they do, are a lot of the times these more targeted? You mentioned great content, so it doesn't seem like these are just randomly, just browsing for anything. Are they more so looking for really good content and then going from there?
Yes, a lot of the time, content scrapers that are going to be used for malicious purposes are going to target sites with a high search rank for popular keywords. So yes, it's not entirely random.
So how are these content scrapers working? What methods do they use, or how is it really carried out?
So there's a number of different methods they can use. They can use just, like a wget or a curl script, just grabbing the data using a simple request and parsing it a certain way. There's also, more specific programs, HTML scrapers and parsers, like JSoup or Scrapey. A lot of them are written in Python because Python has a lot of libraries for parsing HTML. And, they extract data from your site and basically store it in a way that's replicable or useful to whoever's scraping the content. And then, you've got, screen scrapers, browser emulators, things like headless Chrome. And there's not really all that much you can do to stop something like that, but it is resource intensive and a bit slower. So I mean, something like that is going to look a lot more like an actual person browsing a site, but it's also going to be about as slow as an actual person browsing a site.
Now, for anybody viewing who's just starting to use Wordfence potentially, we are going to go over some features in Wordfence, and we're going to show you some of the options that we have to help out here the best that you can with Wordfence. Now, we're talking about some of the different types of scrapers and bots that we commonly see. What are spiders in this sense, Ram? Because I know, like, real spiders I'm terrified of. So should I be afraid of these sorts of spiders?
Generally, no. Spiders, so Google's bot is a spider. Other website, other search engine bots are spiders, and there's malicious spiders as well. Typically, they don't try to copy all the content on a site. Typically, they're looking for specific data, and they're trying to get a sense of the structure of your site. So, they'll visit different pages and follow links as far as they can go to figure out how it's mapped out. This is actually one of the reasons why Google likes you to have a sitemap, is because it does save them some work. So...
Now, I'll take your word for it, but I think all spiders are malicious.
I mean, if you don't want Google to, list your site, then you're free to have that opinion.
So you mentioned wget. So can you tell us what shell scripts are and how they relate to the scrapers and bots?
Sure. So shell scripts, basically, there's a number of command line binary tools that come with pretty much most installations of Linux. Windows PowerShell has a similar tool for basically just making a direct HTTP request to grab content from a site. It's basically the same thing. It just grabs the data from the wire on port 80 or 443. So,
and how about screen scrapers you mentioned?
That's more going to be something like we use for test automation, where it's an actual browser that's being programmatically instructed to follow a series of steps using something like Selenium, or something like Headless Chrome, which is a browser that's not attached to a screen but still saves pictures of what the requests come back with and renders them.
So back to my fear of spiders here. Okay, so we're talking about some Google crawlers and whatnot. Dave has a question about spiders here. If your site tells spiders to stay away, do the malicious ones really respect that?
No, they do not, and not all of the benign ones do either. So, yeah.
So we were going over some different types of scrapers and bots here. Anything, any others to mention there before we move on here?
There's something that's sort of I want to say adjacent to the scraping issue. It's not exactly scraping, but it can get used by malicious websites and even malicious mobile apps, and that is embedding your site in a frame on someone else's site. And this can be used for something like clickjacking attacks, where they'll use the reputation of your site to collect information from people who are visiting what they think is your site because it's in a frame on their site, but it's actually their site. There are ways to deal with that, and that's actually probably one of the things you almost certainly should do. But we'll get to how to deal with that in a bit. The last thing is that, never forget that if someone really wants what's on your site, they can just visit your site and copy and paste it. And I mean, yes, there are tools that, that prevent right-click copy to download images, but nothing's really going to stop someone who is truly dedicated to, copying your content, which is why we do focus a bit on what to do if someone actually republishes it. So I guess I've been asked to explain what a frame is. Basically, an inline frame is, so if I have a website, I can say I want to insert a frame that shows the contents of google.com. If I go to my website, I'll see the window that, with the Google search bar in it. So yeah.
Now, we mentioned at the top of the show here, well, before we get into that, you had talked about images and the different methods that there are to protect them. As far as image stealing, do you have any recommendations on that?
I do, actually. I think that one of the best things you can do is to, well, number one, don't steal images yourself. But number two, for your own images that you own, watermark them. that will discourage people from reusing them somewhere else because it'll be fairly clear that they're stolen. And that will also make it much easier for you to spot if someone else is using your images. And I mean, yes, okay, nowadays there are certain, machine learning driven ways to remove watermarks, but they're still not that easy.
Definitely some things to consider there. If you're seeing your content ending up on other sites or images being stolen, watermarking is definitely an option there. So at the top of the show, I had mentioned some potential risks as far as your search ranking there. What are some other risks, and can you explain more how that might affect your search ranking? Is that probably the worst potential side effect of this?
I mean, yes, if, there's duplicate content on multiple sites and it doesn't link back to your site, it can potentially steal your link juice or potentially steal your search engine ranking for a given set of keywords, depending on what the, clone site has on it that's different from your site. Brandon Godding also mentions that in addition to watermarks, good metadata on images helps. I believe he's talking about EXIF metadata. Now that can be stripped from images, so it's not an end-all be-all, but it can help, find if someone has, stolen your images, and it can, you can embed information about where the copyright is. So
I think
not everyone thinks to actually alter that or modify that.
That is a good point. I think I see Billy the pup there in that picture. So we may have a new image later on, not yet, of Billy. So where are we at here? So we've been talking about scrapers, what the risks are with your site. Now, how can you tell if your content is being scraped? Is this something like if you have a lot of content on your site, you get a lot of hits, is this something you should look for, or how else can you tell?
So this gets kind of tedious, no matter what you do. But realistically, one of the simplest things you can do is just search Google for your post titles. If someone is copying your posts, it'll be pretty obvious. And, there are brand monitoring tools you can subscribe to, but there is still a bit of noise to go through in the signal, depending on what your brand is. That is one of the reasons to, have a fairly distinct brand. But even then, people will be talking about you and might have to go through a bunch of stuff before you realize that people are actually copying your content. So...
Now, what might you see? Is there anything as far as in your logs? Are you going to see traffic hitting from a large number of IPs, or how might that look?
So if someone is scraping your site, you will typically see a bunch of traffic from a single IP to, every single link on your site in fairly quick succession. I mean, yes, it can be distributed, and in some cases scraping is distributed, which is why blocking individual IPs is not a great solution. But typically it will show up in your logs as, a bunch of requests to every page on your site by a single IP in rapid succession, faster than a human would typically do that.
Okay, now we're coming to the point here to talk about, we've talked about identifying these, how they go about working, and why they're looking for your content. As far as why they're looking for your content, is this typically to make money?
I mean, pretty much anything that any malicious actor does on the internet is to make money these days. There's not even all that, even script kiddies, have largely been hired away by, criminal organizations. So there's not that many defacements that are just defacements anymore. It's almost all malicious enterprises are for the purposes of making money. And black hat SEO is a huge business.
So coming right along to how to defeat these content scrapers and protect your site. So if you've identified that your content is elsewhere online, what do you think the first step would be there?
Well, I think that I don't know about the first step. I think the most important thing you can do is actually to check to see if your content is being used without your permission, because the truth is you're never really going to stop everyone who is trying to grab content from your site. but you can make life more difficult for the ones that are persistent and clearly malicious. So a big part of your efforts should be dedicated to making sure that people aren't actually using your content and publishing it without your permission. With that said, there's a few other things you can do. There are some technical measures you can use. You can add internal links to all of your content, which is, link from one page to another. Again, if people republish your content and don't check it carefully, they might not replace those links with links to, their own site, though they can do that. But if they don't, then yes, Google does have a tool to disavow malicious links. Though that's typically not going to be super relevant in cases like that, because they will actually secretly be helping you, potentially. Other things you can do is, again, monitor your logs and traffic patterns. You can limit access if you see unusual activity. And you can use Wordfence Live Traffic to see if you're getting a lot of requests, though you would want to set that to all traffic rather than security only, so that can,
Now, that was something that we had switched over to security only. It's a little bit easier to monitor your traffic, but the option is there to switch over to all traffic if you want to see all the hits to your site. And if you're suspecting something like this, you might want to do that. Now, in the event that somebody were to do that, Ram, what might this scraper or bot activity look like? You had mentioned that you may just see a single IP hitting the site and then hitting each page. Is there anything with the user agent or anything like that to take a look at?
Well, I will say that if someone is using a shell script or something written in Python or whatnot, then there is a chance that they will not have tweaked the user agent. Now, again, you can spoof the user agent, so this is not a end-all be-all solution, but there are a lot of lazy content scrapers out there who will just set the user agent to Python requests. And if you're seeing a lot of hits from a user agent that doesn't look like a real browser, you can block it in Wordfence. And that's fairly simple to do, and I'll actually show you guys how to do it in a little bit after we get to one of the other technical... Actually, I can just show you guys now. Give me a second. So, in case you're wondering, this is the Wordfence dashboard. Let's go to Manage Firewall. And let's see. Oops. I have this window too small. Now it was firewall blocking. There we go. And then you can do custom pattern, and you can do browser user agent, and you can do something like Python on requests, for instance, if you wanted to block the Python requests library. Content scraping. And then any visitor with that user agent will be blocked, well, permanently until you unblock them.
Now, that is done solely through Wordfence's blocking mechanisms. Is that changing the htaccess at that point?
No, it is not.
Now, would it be worth adding a directive to the htaccess if you're seeing a large number of hits from IPs? Is that going to save you anything there?
So realistically, yes, blocking at the htaccess level is actually going to be a little bit less resource intensive. But if you're at the point where you're worrying about how resource intensive blocking at that level is versus blocking at the Wordfence level, you may want to do it at the CDN level instead. Use a content distribution network as in addition to the safety features we have here. So, okay. I mean, it's one of those layered security things. The main thing about content scraping is that no single technical measure is going to be all that effective, just because it's really hard to tell who you want reading your content and who you don't want reading your content. And, there's no way to just know. But there are some things you can do to make life more difficult for the people that are being obvious about it and being obviously malicious.
Now, we just showed some advanced blocking there with the user agent, and in a moment we can go over some rate limiting. I saw in the chat we had some questions about the real-time IP block list, which is a premium feature. So on that note, I would like to thank our premium subscribers who are watching either right now or the replay after this airs. Thankfully, we're able to do these streams and build services such as, Fast or Slow and Wordfence Central. And if you haven't gotten a chance to take a look at those, definitely give those a look. And you can check those out at fasterslow.com and wordfence.com/central. The real-time IP blacklist RAM, that can, in cases, help with issues like this with IPs hitting the site, just due to the fact that we're looking all the time at these IPs and constantly throwing them onto the block list, right?
That's correct. To the extent that, if a set of IPs is engaged in one type of malicious behavior, they're often engaged in multiple types of malicious behavior. So if an IP, ends up trying to do a bunch of brute force logins or ends up trying to exploit a particular vulnerability, people might also be using it to scrape content. And if it does any of those other malicious things, tries to exploit a vulnerability or tries to, attack a site using a brute force or a credential stuffing attack, it'll end up on the block list until it starts behaving itself. So that can help.
Now that's always one of the features that I bring up with Premium, because you don't have to set anything up for it. As soon as you put your license in, you have the real-time IP block list enabled, and we do all the work for that. Another good feature is country blocking. And this Premium feature, if you're only doing business in the US or you're only doing business in the UK, gives you the option to block selected countries either from the entire site or from the login form. So maybe you're seeing a high number of brute force attacks on your site and you just don't want to have the ability there open for people to log in from certain countries. That's another awesome Premium feature that you can enable, and you don't really need to do much after that. You can leave it as is, and it's taking away from what the brute force protection needs to do on your site. So that's another good option to consider if you're just getting set up with Premium or you're considering Premium. And remember, Wordfence Premium is $99 for a year on your site, but that also covers your staging sites or your test sites if you have them. So awesome features there. So we were talking about rate limiting RAM. Do you want to go over that now?
In a minute. Jeremy Wyatt asked about using steganography. And I think this is an interesting question. I believe he's referring to the practice of hiding content inside images, basically putting a secret message inside an image. Now, that is potentially something you could do to identify an image as belonging to you. The main problem is that steganographic content is fragile. If someone converts the image to another image type, then whatever was encoded in it might not survive the transformation. Now, this is something that, there might be more useful information, and I'm sure that, research might be ongoing. But for the time being, it's probably not your best bet. So what we were going to go for... another thing I wanted to mention before we got to rate limiting is if you want to block people from embedding your website in an iframe, then there is something you can do, and that is to set an xframe options header for same origin. So the only site that can embed your site is your own site. You can do this using an htaccess file. You can do this by adding a PHP code. You can do this by changing the nginx.conf file if you're on nginx. There are plugins that'll add the htaccess for you. Wordfence doesn't do this because we try not to go overboard on feature creep, but if it is something that you can do, and there are many ways to do, and that is probably advisable if you don't have a pressing need to have your site embedded in another site.
It's a good thing to keep in mind. We had a comment, so if we have the known block list activated, we don't need to use the advanced bot blocking. If you're mentioning the real-time IP blacklist that I was talking about with the Premium features, you still may want to use your advanced blocking, either using a user agent or a range if you're seeing successful hits on the site, because it may not be on the block list at the time. It may not be carrying out a large-scale attack. So one good thing about the block list that we offer for Premium is that we manage it on our side. So once we see attacks stop from those IPs, they're removed from the block list there. So that's one good thing. If you're setting up a large number of advanced blocks on your side, and you're setting up permanent blocks there, you should really be taking a look to see if those are still being blocked or if they've been inactive for weeks or months, as those could then be unblocked. A lot of times these sorts of attacks and are these scrapers probably switching IPs pretty frequently as well, Ram?
To my knowledge, yes. Scrapers will be switching IPs. A single scraping run is probably going to use the same IP, but if there's multiple scraping runs, then they're probably going to come from different IPs.
Okay, so on to rate limiting. This is a feature in Wordfence that is free, and I think on a lot of sites, this should be set up at least sort of lenient, right, Ram? Just so it's there to help.
Yeah. So this is probably the most useful technical solution that Wordfence offers, simply because it'll block any bots that are being obviously bad about requesting a lot of traffic. So you can go to firewall and rate limiting. And so by default, we don't actually rate limit because we don't know how much traffic is normal for your site. And there's another thing. So you know how it says if anyone's requests exceed a certain number per minute? So there's a couple things to parse there. When you request a page, when you load up a page, it's not a single request. Your browser requests that page. The page says, hey, you need to request these, 5 to 500 other things in order to make the site load. CSS files, JavaScript files, image files. So any given page visit can end up with multiple requests. So we do recommend that, if anyone's requests exceed, we recommend that you keep that at 120 per minute and set it to throttle, though you can turn it down if you really want to. It all depends on your site. Now, if a crawler's page requests exceed a certain amount per minute, that's also set by default to 120. Now, 404s, we recommend you set it to 60, but if you're seeing a lot of 404s, that's another thing. A lot of web crawlers and scrapers, they'll get a lot of 404. You'll see a lot of 404s in your logs because they'll be sort of exploring to see what pages exist, and they might not know all the pages that exist. So they're just going to, they're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. So you might even be able to afford to set this a little bit lower.
Is that similar to the top option, the requests exceed, in the sense that if you have maybe a half a dozen images on your site that aren't loading or are not configured correctly, are those going to count towards that?
They will,
any
which
given
is
page load?
They will, which is why we recommend you have it set to 60 or 30, 60, just in case your site is set up like that. But again, we don't set defaults on these because they're going to vary very much by your individual site configuration. So they do require some testing to see what'll work for you.
I see Adam is posting the link to our documentation there. So if you're interested in setting up rate limiting, you can click on that link, and it gives our recommendations here, which Ram is going over.
Yeah, and I mean, you can set it to throttle or you can set it to block for various lengths of time, up to a month, depending on how bad it gets. And again, this is going to be, to some extent, you can have this set proactively, but any tweaks are probably going to have to be made reactively once you start seeing, bots having fairly heavy activity. You can kind of get an idea of what their usage pattern is and maybe set your limits a little bit stricter if necessary.
Yeah, so and we do recommend to, for the most part, use the throttling option. Is that right?
Yes, unless you know for sure that this is not a normal usage pattern. If you don't have any broken image links on your site and normal visitors never get 404s, but some bot is racking up 404s by the hundreds, then in that case you can be fairly comfortable setting a block for excessive 404s.
Now, how about XMLRPC with regards to content scrapers and bots? Is there any relation there, and does disabling that help?
So XMLRPC can be used to scrape content, as can the REST API. So by default, Wordfence does block, or not by default. Is it by default?
The XMLRPC being
Yeah.
disabled?
Yeah.
I thought it was not disabled by default.
Yeah, it's not disabled by default. We do offer the option to prevent people from logging in using XMLRPC, and that helps a lot of cases where people are trying to brute force your site because they can use it to bypass. They can use it to bypass, a hidden WP admin page. But the thing is, a lot of things still do use XMLRPC, so we don't offer an option to completely get rid of it. Because things like Jetpacks and things like the WordPress app will use the XMLRPC. With that said, if you're not using any of these, you can delete that file or just disallow all access to it, and that is another thing you can do. With the REST API, we don't recommend blocking that because so many things in WordPress core and so many WordPress plugins use it.
Okay, now there's some more things that go along with this, such as RSS feeds, permalinks. How do RSS feeds factor in here? Does that make it, if you have those enabled and they're set up as you would expect them to be, is that making it easier for these scrapers?
I mean, yes, but a lot of people do use RSS readers, and their traffic might look like an RSS, reader might look like a scraper. If people are relying on watching your site to see if you have any new posts, if you're trying to get people to subscribe to your content, it's not super surprising if scrapers are looking at your content. However, again, with things like RSS, XMLRPC, or the REST API content, it's not going to be the context of your site. It's not going to have the site styles. It's mostly not going to have the site's any background images of the site. So anyone looking to specifically clone your site might not be using that method.
Okay, so we're talking about methods here that these scrapers are using and how to defend yourself. So, as far as the best way to defend yourself, it's reporting these issues for infringement. Would that be right?
Correct. There is only so much you can do on a technical level to stop people from scraping your site, just because I'm assuming you want people reading your content. Yes, paywalls will prevent content scraping. Dallas Cobb has that comment. And realistically, paywalls, password protecting posts, having members only areas, that is a fairly strong way to protect your content. Scrapers won't be able to get to that. On the other hand, that does limit your reach to some extent. So it very much depends on your site's monetization strategy. Some of your content is probably going to be invariably public, however. So, incidentally, I believe that them accessing password protected stuff might not be so much in the clear. But yeah, paywalls are a great way to prevent people from content scraping. Unfortunately, they also tend to limit your audience. It depends on what you're going for. The best option is basically to find out if people are stealing your content and republishing it, and then to send them a DMCA takedown notice. You can send it to their host, actually. It has to be the copyright owner, or someone who the copyright owner has delegated that permission to. So yeah, as Dave Harrington says, being public is the point of having a web presence. With that said, if someone abuses content you've created, you can get their host to take down that content. I'm not going to go over the details of how to send a DMCA takedown notice. There's a lot of information available online, but basically it comes down to making sure that they're not using the content in a way that's fair use. Like if it's some academic commenting on your content, that might be allowed. I'm not a lawyer, so don't want to get too much into detail, but if someone is, clearly stealing your content and copying it verbatim to make money, that's probably not cool. End up then sending their host a request to have it taken down because you are the, content owner.
Now, summing this up, are there any dangers in protecting your site from scrapers? And one thing you need to keep in mind when we went over the rate limiting, you don't want to be too strict there, because if you start blocking, good crawlers, and you have them blocked for a large amount of time, that can have an effect there. But are there any other dangers there as far as what we went over and just protecting your site in general?
I mean, again, the biggest danger is that you're going to block actual users or legitimate search engine bots like Google bots, which will harm your SEO. It'll harm your site's reputation. I guess what I'm getting at is that, technical protections can help, but don't go overboard with them, or they can be counterproductive. Block the people are actually abusing your site, but if you think you're going to stop everyone, you're going to end up stopping, legitimate users. You're going to end up stopping legitimate search engine bots. Yeah. And there's a question of it. Would DMCA takedowns be relevant for organizations hosted outside the USA? And to be clear, I'm not actually 100% sure. I think it depends on the country the actual host is based in, but that will require more research. If you want to send in a request to feedback can maybe look into it. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm possibly not the person who should be answering these questions, but I suspect that a lawyer has published the answer to that question somewhere.
The Scholar's Corner has a question. Why would any human hit more than 60 404s in a minute or 120 page requests in a minute?
So that's sort of what I was getting at earlier. When you load a web page, you're not just sending a single request. You're saying, hey, I want this web page, and the web page says, great, in order to display properly, I'm going to need all this stuff from these places. I'm going to need this image, this CSS file, this JavaScript file, this other image, this other CSS file. And all of those together can easily exceed 60 to 120 requests for some sites. Again, if you have a bunch of broken image links on a page, let's say you've got a gallery page with 100 pictures on it, and half the links are broken, or more than half the links are broken, then you have 60 404s in a single request. Now, let's say someone clicks that page twice, and you've got more 404s. Now, you can use fast or slow, by the way, to get an idea of how many things get loaded every time you request a page on your site. It'll actually tell you. And yes, fast or slow is actually based on headless Chrome. It does render a copy of your site, but we're not actually stealing your content. We've just got a screenshot so you can look at what your site looks like when it's rendered. But yeah, you can use it to see how many requests any given page on your site actually loads, and from where, and if there's any 404s. So yeah.
If your rate limiting rules are set up too strict, would you prevent fast or slow from detailing the site correctly?
You could. We actually have an interesting question from Felicia Betancourt, which is it helpful to use rel equals canonical in the head? And this is similar to the idea of, using links to your own sites. It can be. That depends on how detail-oriented the people that are copying your content are. If they're detail-oriented enough, they will just change it. If they're not, then they might end up with content that just redirects to your site. So, yeah.
So we're about a quarter till 1 p.m. here in Pittsburgh and Eastern Time. So let's get over to our swag winners. I believe we have a graphic there. Also, Ram, so what is the most helpful tool in Wordfence for stopping these content scrapers?
I think rate limiting is probably really where it's at because it does take a little bit of configuration, but there's some relatively safe defaults that'll come in fairly handy. Yeah.
So we have Amy Pace, Jean Valdez-Shehu, Alexander Brown, and Randall Snyder. I believe Valdez-Shehu, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but has written in and had some awesome feedback for the show. So we always appreciate that. If you have any feedback, any ideas, anything like that, feel free to reach out, feedback@wordfence.com. We enjoy hearing from you, and we appreciate it. So good job there on winning the swag. Off of the swag question, which is what is the most helpful tool in Wordfence for thwarting content scrapers, and that was rate limiting, which we went over there. We posted some links for the documentation on rate limiting and some general settings and recommendations similar to what Ram went over there. I believe we have a picture of the official Wordfence mascot, Billy, there.
Aw.
Always cute to see. Glad that you're back, Brandon, this week to watch the show. So we went over a good bit there, Ram. Anything to cap it off with these content scrapers? Depending on what you're seeing right now on the site, you might not run right over and jump into the access logs and take a look. But like you said, it might be good to search some of your blog titles and your post titles on Google maybe and just get an idea.
Yeah. I think really the big takeaway from here is that, a website is not just a static thing that you let sit, or even something that, you just write content for. A website is something as it becomes more valuable, becomes a bigger target and requires, more maintenance, more input. And it is worth doing these things and protecting your brand. So, yeah.
Definitely.
I know it's even more on your plate after SEO and all that stuff, though. If you're paying close attention to your SEO, you'll probably notice if this happens. But it is just something more to be aware of, that, that having a website does take some work. It is an investment of your time as well as everything else. And there's no easy one-shot solutions, but there are always things you can do to empower yourself.
I see we have a comment that we need more time for cats, so we might need to get back to Sally's cat blog at some point, right?
Agreed. And if any of our viewers have, some cat pictures they would like to send us, please send them to feedback at.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned at the top, when
I still
we
love
started,
Billy Piper, though.
Yeah, Billy's tough to beat, and we always appreciate those pictures. So Chloe did not join us today, but she is working on a blog post that should be published later today. So that means if you're not currently subscribed to the mailing list, the blog mailing list, or the podcast mailing list, go ahead and check those out and get updated whenever we send that post live. You're also going to hear about other vulnerabilities and things like that you might not hear from elsewhere. It's going to be probably the first that you're hearing about it. So get on the mailing list and better protect yourself there. Ram, you talked about fast or slow a little bit earlier. Can you give us just a little overview of that for anybody who's not familiar and hasn't used it yet?
Sure. Fast or Slow is our distributed website performance testing tool. It's at fastorslow.com. Spelled out like it sounds. And Adam, if you could post that. Oh, you already did post the link. Cool. And it tells you how fast or slow your site is from 18 different locations worldwide. But it also lets you dig into the details from each location, seeing what's loading and how long it's taking and places you can improve your site's performance, and also stuff like, what's not loading. So it's a pretty useful tool. It's very cool. And you can use it to figure out what you need to improve your site's speed, which is also important for SEO, by the way.
Yeah, if you haven't checked it out yet, go head over. All you got to do is put your URL in there, and you can subscribe to the reports going forward. If you enjoyed this video, you can share it with your friends. If they're curious about this, if they've brought up content scraping, share the channel. We have a bunch of videos. We've been doing this since April. Give or take, and we've had videos on the channel prior to that. We have a lot of feature setup videos walking you through different things such as Wordfence Central. We just implemented Teams there, so if you're an agency, if you're running anything like that, if you have a bunch of sites on Central, you need somebody else to take a look at them, you can use Central Teams. It's very easy to set up. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up there. You can subscribe. If you hit the bell icon, you're going to be notified when we go live, and we are typically live each Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. If you've not seen our film Open yet, head over to open.film. It's a short film about the WordPress community. If you haven't been out to a WordCamp or you haven't interacted with people that are spending a lot of time in WordPress, this will give you an idea of what you're getting there. And I miss it quite a bit, getting out to the WordCamps. We're getting closer, right, Ram? But until then, we'll be here on live.
We are. And we have an interesting question from Dean Sewer. How do Wordfence's rules interact with CDNs, such as Cloudflare? They work great. Seriously, I would say don't rely on a CDN for all of your malicious blocking needs, just because they're not going to be geared towards WordPress specific problems. But Wordfence rules work fine with Cloudflare, as long as Cloudflare is sending the correct origin IP along, of course. In which case you will want to make sure that Wordfence is detecting the correct visitor IP, but we should auto detect that by default. So, yep, keep on layering your security, everyone.
Yes, it never hurts when configured correctly to have a little bit extra there. We appreciate everybody stopping by and sending over your questions. Feel free to take a look at the channel here for some of our past content. If you want to see Ram and myself get hacked by Chloe, just click on one of the videos. You're probably going to end up on one of them, because Chloe likes to get us there, clicking on some bad links. So check those out. Hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We will be back next week with some more content. Ram, anything else before we clock out here?
Just thanks for watching, as always, everyone. We appreciate you all.
We appreciate it a lot, and thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week. Until then, have a good rest of the week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.